Imagine the year 900 AD. You are standing on the deck of a longship, a narrow wooden vessel that feels far too small for the vast, churning grey of the North Atlantic. Behind you lies the coast of Norway, long since vanished below the horizon. Ahead of you is nothing but a wall of thick, oppressive fog. The wind is biting, the salt spray stings your eyes, and for 3 days, you haven't seen the sun. In this era, there are no magnetic compasses. There are no sextants. There are no maps as we understand them today. If you lose your way, you don't just get delayed, you die. Yet, the Vikings did not die. They thrived. They crossed thousands of miles of open ocean to reach Iceland, Greenland, and eventually the shores of North America. How did they do it? For centuries, historians called it luck or perhaps an almost supernatural instinct for the sea. But deep within the Old Norse sagas, there were mentions of a mysterious object, the Sólsteinn or sunstone. For a long time, modern scholars dismissed the sunstone as a myth, a poetic metaphor for the favor of the gods. But today, we know better. This is the story of how ancient Norse mariners used a simple crystal to turn the sky into a clock and the clouds into a map. To understand the genius of the Viking navigators, we first have to understand the environment they were operating in. The North Atlantic is one of the most hostile environments on Earth. It is a place of extreme weather, where storms can appear out of nowhere and where the sky is frequently obscured by heavy cloud cover or dense fog. In the summer months, when the Vikings did most of their sailing, the sun often stays very low on the horizon or hides behind a grey veil for weeks at a time. Traditional navigation relies on landmarks, but once you are 100 miles out to sea, those are gone. You are left with the stars, the moon, and the sun. But in the far north, during the summer, the stars are often invisible because the sky never gets truly dark. This left the sun as the primary guide. If you knew where the sun was, you knew your direction. You could use a sun compass, a wooden disc with a central pin that cast a shadow. By tracking that shadow, you could maintain a consistent latitude. But what happens when the sun disappears? What happens when the world turns grey? This is where the legend of the Sunstone begins. The primary written source for the Sunstone is a medieval Icelandic tale called Ralph's A with acute TTR. In this story, King Olaf the Holy is travelling with a man named Sigurður. The sky is completely overcast and snowing. The king asks Sigurður to locate the sun, even though it's hidden. Sigurður points to a spot in the grey sky. To verify this, the king takes a sunstone, holds it up, and looks through it. According to the saga, the stone glowed or changed in a way that revealed the sun's position, confirming Sigurður was correct. For hundreds of years, this was treated as a tall tale. Crystals don't see through clouds, right? Well, it turns out they do, provided you understand the physics of light. To unlock the secret of the sunstone, we have to look at the atmosphere. Sunlight, when it leaves the sun, is unpolarized. This means the light waves are vibrating in all different directions. However, as that light enters Earth's atmosphere and hits air molecules, it scatters. This scattering polarizes the light, meaning the waves begin to vibrate in a specific direction relative to the position of the sun. Even on a cloudy day, the light passing through the clouds is polarized in a pattern that forms concentric circles around the sun. To the naked human eye, this pattern is invisible. The sky just looks like a flat, uniform grey. But certain minerals have a property called birefringence, or double refraction. The most famous of these is Iceland Spar, a clear variety of the mineral calcite. When light enters a piece of Iceland Spar, it is split into 2 separate rays. Because of the crystal's atomic structure, these 2 rays are polarized at right angles to each other. If you look through the crystal at the sky, you will see 2 slightly different images of the world. Now, here is the magic. As you rotate the crystal, the relative brightness of these 2 images changes depending on the polarization of the light hitting it. When the 2 images reach the exact same level of brightness, the crystal is pointed directly toward the sun. It doesn't matter if the sun is behind a cloud. It doesn't even matter if the sun has dipped just below the horizon. As long as there is some light in the sky, the Iceland Spar can detect the polarization pattern and point the way to the light source. Imagine the tactical advantage this gave a Viking navigator. They could be in the middle of a storm, with the sun completely hidden, and yet, by pulling this small, clear stone from a leather pouch, they could find their bearing within a few degrees of accuracy. It was the world's first high-tech navigation tool. But finding the sun was only the first step. To actually cross an ocean, you need a system. Scientists have recently reconstructed how this system likely worked. The navigator wouldn't just look through the stone once. They would use it in conjunction with a sun compass. By finding the sun's position with the stone, they could then place a virtual shadow on their compass. This allowed them to maintain a steady course toward Greenland or Newfoundland even when they were sailing blind. There was a famous experiment conducted by researchers in Hungary and Sweden where they tested the reliability of this method. They used computer simulations and physical trials to see if a person could actually navigate from Norway to Greenland using only a sunstone and a sun compass under various weather conditions. The results were staggering. They found that if a navigator checked the sunstone at least once every 3 hours, they had a 92% to 100% chance of reaching their destination accurately. If they only checked it every 4 or 5 hours, the success rate dropped significantly. This suggests that the Vikings weren't just lucky, they were disciplined. Navigation was a constant, rhythmic process of observation and correction. But where is the physical evidence? For a long time, no sunstones had ever been found in a Viking grave or a settlement. This led many to remain skeptical. However, in 2013, a major breakthrough occurred. Archaeologists were studying a shipwreck found off the coast of Alderney in the English Channel. The ship was an Elizabethan vessel from 1592, hundreds of years after the Viking Age. But sitting right next to the ship's navigation tools, a pair of dividers, was a small, weathered piece of Iceland Spar. Why would a 16th century ship have a sunstone? The answer is fascinating. By the late 1500s, ships were equipped with large iron cannons. These massive pieces of metal interfered with magnetic compasses, making them unreliable. It appears that even centuries after the Vikings, sailors were still using the sunstone as a backup failsafe because it relied on the physics of light rather than magnetism. While this wasn't a Viking-era find, it proved that Iceland Spar was used as a serious navigation tool at sea. The use of the sunstone also changes our perspective on Viking culture. We often think of them as raiders and warriors, barbarians at the gate. But the sunstone reveals a culture of profound observation and scientific inquiry. They may not have known the math of Rayleigh scattering or the molecular structure of calcite, but they were master experimentalists. They observed the natural world, identified a reliable pattern, and built a technology to exploit it. They were essentially mapping the sky. They understood that the sky wasn't just a void above the water, it was a structured map of light. This mapping extended beyond just the sunstone. Viking navigation was a holistic art. They looked at the color of the water to estimate depth and proximity to land. They watched the flight patterns of birds. If you see a puffin flying with a beak full of fish, you know you are close to land, because puffins only fly back to shore to feed their young. They felt the temperature of the currents and smelled the air for the scent of trees or peat smoke. They even used whales as guides. There is an Old Norse navigation guide that tells sailors to look for the breathing of the great fish to determine if they are on the right track between Iceland and Greenland. The sunstone was the centerpiece of this toolkit, the high-precision instrument that tied all the other observations together. Think about the sheer bravery required to trust a crystal in the middle of the North Atlantic. You are weeks away from home. Your food is running low. The crew is tired and cold. The horizon is a solid wall of grey. Everyone is looking to you, the navigator. You hold up this piece of Iceland Spar. You rotate it slowly, watching the twin images flicker and shift in brightness. You find the point of equilibrium. You point your finger through the fog and say, "The sun is there. We steer west-southwest." To the crew, it might have looked like magic. To the navigator, it was the only way to survive. The legacy of the sunstone myth, and its eventual scientific validation, serves as a reminder that ancient peoples were often far more sophisticated than we give them credit for. We tend to view history as a linear progression of intelligence, where we are the smartest because we have the most advanced tools. But the Vikings achieved global reach with tools made of wood, bone, and stone. They mapped the clouds because they had to. Their survival depended on their ability to read the invisible signals of the planet. Today, we use GPS satellites that beam signals down from orbit. We don't need to look at the sky anymore. Most of us couldn't find north without our phones, let alone find the sun behind a cloud. But there is something lost in that convenience. The Viking navigator was intimately connected to the rhythm of the earth. They knew the sky, the sea, and the stones. The sunstone wasn't just a tool. It was a bridge between the human mind and the complex physics of the atmosphere. As we look back at the Viking Age, the sunstone stands as a symbol of human ingenuity. It tells us that the Dark Ages weren't so dark after all. In the midst of the northern gloom, the Norsemen found a way to see the light. They proved that even when the sun is hidden and the path is lost, there is always a way to find your bearing if you know where to look. They mapped the clouds, they tamed the Atlantic, and they changed the course of history, all with a small, clear crystal held up against a grey sky. In the modern era, researchers are still uncovering the depths of this ancient knowledge. Recent studies have looked into entoptic phenomena, the idea that some humans can actually see the polarization of light with the naked eye. It's called Hades brush. It's a very faint yellow and blue pattern that appears in the center of your vision when you look at polarized light. While most people can't see it without training, it's possible that the most experienced Viking navigators had trained their eyes to see the sun's location even without the stone, using the stone only to calibrate their vision. This would explain how Sigurd in the sagas could point to the sun before the king even pulled out the sunstone. It suggests a level of sensory attunement to the environment that we can barely imagine today. The story of the sunstone is also a story about the intersection of myth and reality. For centuries, the sagas were treated as fiction. But as we dig deeper, both into the earth and into the physics of our world, we find that the myths are often encoded records of actual technology. The Vikings didn't have a word for birefringence, so they called it a sunstone. They didn't have a word for polarization, so they described the stone as catching the light of the sun. When we dismiss ancient stories as mere fantasy, we risk losing the hard-won wisdom of our ancestors. Consider the journey from Norway to Vinland, modern-day Newfoundland. It is a journey of over 2,000 miles across the most treacherous waters on Earth. To do that in an open boat, with no engine and no compass, is one of the greatest technical achievements in human history. It required more than just courage. It required a sophisticated understanding of geometry, astronomy, and mineralogy. The sunstone was the key that unlocked the ocean. It turned the Atlantic from a barrier into a highway. As the sun sets on our exploration of this myth, let's reflect on that image one more time. A lone navigator on a wooden ship, surrounded by ice and fog, holding a crystal to the sky. It is a moment of pure connection between humanity and the cosmos. The clouds are no longer an obstacle, they are a canvas. The stone is no longer a rock, it is a lens. And the navigator is no longer lost, they are exactly where they need to be. The Viking Sunstone isn't just a part of Norse history, it is a testament to the universal human drive to explore, to understand, and to find our way home, no matter how thick the clouds may be. In the end, the sunstone myth reminds us that technology isn't just about silicon chips and fiber optics. Technology is any tool that expands the reach of human perception. For the Vikings, that tool was a piece of Iceland Spar. It allowed them to see the invisible, to navigate the impossible, and to discover new worlds. It is a legacy of brilliance that still shines, 1,000 years later, as clear as the light through a sunstone. When we think about the Viking Age, we often focus on the end of the journey, the battles, the settlements, the gold. But the true heart of the Viking achievement was the journey itself. It was the hours and days spent in the middle of the grey void, relying on nothing but their wits and their tools. The sunstone represents the intellectual edge that made the Viking expansion possible. Without it, the history of Europe, and indeed the history of the Americas, might have looked very different. Archaeology continues to seek more definitive Viking-era sunstones. While the Alderney find is compelling, the search for a 10th century calcite crystal in a Norse context remains a holy grail for maritime archaeologists. Some argue that because calcite is a relatively common and unremarkable looking mineral when it's not polished, many may have been overlooked in previous excavations. Others suggest that because they were so valuable, they were passed down as heirlooms until they were lost or worn away, rather than buried in graves. But regardless of when the next physical stone is found, the scientific proof is already here. The physics works. The simulations work. The sagas, once again, have been proven to hold a core of remarkable truth. The North Atlantic hasn't changed much since the time of the Vikings. It is still cold, still foggy, and still dangerous. But our relationship to it has changed. We cross it in hours, encased in pressurized cabins, watching movies at 30,000 feet. We have forgotten what it feels like to be truly at the mercy of the elements, and to find our way through them using only our senses and a piece of the earth. The sunstone myth invites us to remember. It invites us to look up at a cloudy sky and realize that there is a world of information hidden in the grey, waiting for the right lens to reveal it. The Norse mariners were not just warriors, they were the premier scientists of the open sea. Their laboratory was the deck of a longship, and their instruments were made of the very land they were trying to find. By mapping the clouds with their sunstones, They mapped the future of human exploration. They showed us that the horizon is not a limit, but a challenge. And they proved that with the right tools and the right spirit, even the most invisible paths can be found. The next time you see a clear piece of calcite, or look up at a heavy, overcast sky, think of those mariners. Think of the Sólsteinn. Think of the way a simple stone could reveal the sun and change the world. It's a reminder that even in our darkest, most clouded moments, the light is still there. We might just need a different perspective to see it. This mastery of light and nature allowed the Vikings to establish a network of trade and exploration that stretched from the Caspian Sea in the east to the tip of North America in the west. This was the first time in history that the globe was truly being connected, and it was all done through a deep, intuitive, and technological understanding of the natural world. The Sunstone wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a broader Norse philosophy that saw the world as something to be deciphered. In the centuries following the Viking Age, the knowledge of the Sunstone began to fade. As the magnetic compass was introduced to Europe from the east, the need for solar navigation diminished. The compass was easier to use and worked in total darkness, not just during the day. The Sunstone became a relic of a bygone era, eventually passing from the hands of sailors into the lines of poets and storytellers. It became a myth. But as we have seen, myths are often just truths that have lost their context. The rediscovery of the Sunstone's utility in the 20th and 21st centuries is a triumph of interdisciplinary science. It took historians, physicists, archaeologists, and sailors working together to reconstruct this lost art. It serves as a powerful example of how looking back can help us move forward. By understanding how the Vikings navigated their world, we gain a deeper appreciation for the resilience and creativity of the human species. In conclusion, the Viking Sunstone is more than just a mineral. It is a symbol of the age of discovery. It represents the moment when humanity stopped being afraid of the deep ocean and started to see it as a place of opportunity. The Norsemen didn't have the sun every day, so they found a way to own the sun, to carry it with them in their pockets in the form of a crystal. They mapped the clouds, they found the land, and in doing so, they left a legacy of innovation that continues to inspire us today. The myth of the Sunstone is a myth no longer. It is a brilliant chapter in the story of human navigation, a clear window into the past, and a shining example of how ancient wisdom can still illuminate our modern world. As we finish this journey through the mist and the light, let's take a final look at the horizon. The Vikings knew that the world was round, they knew the tides, and they knew the stars. But most importantly, they knew that the world was filled with hidden signs. The Sunstone was their key to reading those signs. It was their way of speaking to the sky. And through that conversation, they found their way across the edge of the world. The longships are gone, the sagas are written, and the stones have mostly returned to the earth. But the spirit of the Sunstone, the spirit of finding the light in the dark, lives on in every explorer who looks at a map and wonders what lies beyond the edge. The technical precision of the Norsemen is perhaps best illustrated by the sun compass found in Unatok, Greenland. This wooden fragment, dating back to the 11th century, features a series of incised lines that correspond to the sun's shadow at various latitudes. When used with a sunstone, this compass allowed for incredibly accurate navigation. It wasn't just about knowing where north was, it was about knowing exactly where you were on the curve of the earth. This level of sophistication predates similar instruments in southern Europe by centuries. The Viking Sunstone was the essential component that made this precision possible under the unpredictable northern skies. It's also worth noting the specific type of calcite used. Iceland Spar is unique because of its extreme purity and clarity. Large, clear crystals are found in the volcanic regions of Iceland, which the Vikings settled in the late 9th century. This means that the discovery of the Sunstone's properties likely coincided with their expansion into the North Atlantic. The resource itself was a product of the very land they were exploring. It's a perfect loop. The land provided the tool to find more land. Furthermore, the Sunstone myth challenges the narrative of the primitive Viking. To use a sunstone effectively, one must understand that the sky has a predictable, if invisible, structure. This is a proto-scientific mindset. It requires observation, hypothesis, and verification. When the navigator compared the brightness of the two images in the crystal, they were performing a measurement. They were quantifying the sky. This is the essence of navigation, and it is the essence of science. As we look to the future, there are even discussions about how these ancient techniques might be relevant for modern technology. In an era where we worry about GPS jamming or solar flares knocking out electronic systems, the idea of a completely analog, light-based navigation tool is becoming attractive again. Some researchers are looking at the Sunstone's principles to develop backup navigation sensors for drones and autonomous vehicles. The Viking myth might just end up guiding the robots of the future. This brings our journey full circle. From the deck of a longship in 900 AD to the laboratories of the 21st century, the Sunstone remains a beacon of ingenuity. It tells us that no matter how advanced we become, we must never lose our ability to read the world directly. We must never forget the lessons of those who sailed before us, who looked at a wall of fog and saw not a barrier, but a puzzle to be solved. The Vikings mapped the clouds, and in doing so, they showed us that with the right perspective, the invisible can be made clear, and the unreachable can be reached. The legacy of the Norse mariners is not just one of conquest, but of vision. They saw through the fog, they saw through the clouds, and they saw through the myths of their own time to find a fundamental truth about the world. The Sólsteinn was their guide, but it was their curiosity and their courage that truly led the way. Let us carry that same spirit with us, holding our own sunstones up to the challenges of our time, and finding our way forward through the mists of the unknown. In the final analysis, the Sunstone is a reminder that the world is much more complex and beautiful than it appears at first glance. There are patterns in the sky that we cannot see, forces in the earth that we are only beginning to understand, and stories in our past that are waiting to be rediscovered. The Viking Sunstone myth is no longer a myth. It is a shining reality, a testament to a people who refuse to be blind to the world around them. They found the land because they found the sun, and they found the sun because they were brave enough to look through a stone and trust what it showed them. And so, we leave the North Atlantic behind, the sound of the waves fading, the fog lifting to reveal a clear, bright sun. The navigator puts the stone back in its pouch, the longship sail catches the wind, and the shores of a new world appear on the horizon. The journey was long, the dangers were many, but the way was always clear. Because even when the sun was hidden, the Vikings had the light. They had the Sunstone, and they had the map of the clouds. This is the enduring power of the Norse spirit, to see what others cannot, and to sail where others dare not. The myth has become science, the legend has become history, and the Sunstone remains, forever, a symbol of the light that guides us all home.